I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. Today, we'll meet some of the folks that I introduced as we entered the 100, specifically at Antlers Campsite, which was a midday stop because it had great cell service. As you'll hear in the entry, we even pulled off a FaceTime call from there. And today's haiku is from July 29th, 2024. Excited morning. Inspired yesterday becomes today's adventure. All right, on to our trail glossary today. The very first thing I want to mention here is the idea of the cardinal directions and the way I've been referring to them, because I found myself in the last couple of episodes talking about trail north or trail south. And the reason I say it that way is because we always think about the AT as being north-south. And I think this is probably true of the other two major trails in the U.S. as well. So in my hike, I was headed south. If I was progressing forward, then that was south. This didn't necessarily mean that if I looked at a compass, the cardinal direction I would have been going at all times would have been south. Starting at Katahdin, if I had gone due south the whole time, I would have very quickly ended up in the Atlantic Ocean. But for simplicity, we're always going to refer to my forward progress, for instance, as south. Somebody who was going the other way was always going north. This is also going to lend itself to some notations that are in the guidebook that also have carried over on into the Far Out app. And that is the idea of east and west. I'm headed south. If I'm going left off the trail, that's east. Again, regardless of whether or not that would be east. Most of the time in Maine, I was headed more west than south, honestly. But if I was going left off the trail, it would always be east. I'm headed south. If I'm going right off the trail, that would always be west. And the other way for northbounders. And that way, the guidebook or the Far Out app didn't have to say, oh, if you're southbound, you go right. If you're northbound, you go left. All it had to say was east. Something was, 0.3 E for east, and I'm going to go 0.3 of a mile to my left as a southbounder. The first real term that we mention here in this episode is that of hiker midnight. And it was funny how it always happened. Like, as hikers, we turn in early because we're going to get up relatively early the next day and we're just going to start hiking. On top of that, we've been expending energy all day. So you get to the end of the day and you're pretty much ready for bed. Now, it wasn't a factor at this point in time in June in Maine, but later in the hike, another factor that would factor into that and kind of force me into my sleeping bag a little bit earlier was just that it was cold. And the best thing to do to get warm is just get all your warm layer stuff on and get in the sleeping bag. Again, not really an issue until like North Carolina, Tennessee. But wrap all of this together and you've got this idea of hiker midnight, and that is somewhere around middle of the evening, everybody's pretty much going to start turning in. I would hear some people kind of define hiker midnight as exactly 8 o'clock or something like that. I don't know that there's really such a strict definition to it in any sense, to be honest with you. Somewhere around 7-ish, 8-ish, something like that, everybody's going to kind of start turning in. At some point in time during the entry, I mentioned the register, that I would read register entries. This is just the shelter log that we defined earlier. And then I also talk about a bubble, so that we were in a little bit of a SoBo bubble on this day, or this evening as we turned in. And the idea of a bubble was just when a lot of hikers actually manage to coincide. And so you get this larger group of hikers, and maybe that bubble can move together for a while, or maybe it's just a one night thing and then it splits up or whatever, but it's just a larger group of hikers. And then the last thing I mentioned is hiker boxes. Now, hiker boxes are meant to be, and they really are, a huge help, right? It's where you put something that you're not going to use anymore. And the idea is that it is still useful. Now, not everybody's perfect about this, but most people are really, really good. And I do hope that, like I'll mention I think it's in the commentary, that I think I might have stuck this unboiled rice into a hiker box. I kind of hope I didn't because I was finding it unuseful, so hopefully I just threw that away. And that one kind of goes either way, right? Because maybe somebody would have been fine with that, so maybe it was worth giving away and not throwing away. But the idea is in a hiker box, you're trying to give it away. Also, I would sometimes do a little bit of my resupply from the hiker box as well. I felt like I did that a little bit more early on. And then once I got my resupply routine down, I was really just doing that at the store the whole time. But then again, the other dynamic in there might have been that there were simply more hiker boxes up in Maine, and then there was a dearth of them as I got a little further south. And so my habits changed. June 11th, 2025. New SoBos. Start, Potewajo Spring Lean-To. End, Cooper Brook Falls Lean-To. Miles, 11.4. We woke up at Potewajo and hit the trail with some big energy. Early on, I'm noticing a weird every other day pattern. We had some new acquaintances at Potewajo, Hayden, Wyatt, and David. Young kids just out of high school, taking the AT in bits. Nice guys. They're currently headed northbound through at least part of Maine. I think it is the 100 in Katahdin. Our first stop today was Antlers Campsite, where rumor was there was excellent cell service. Turned out to be true. We were able to FaceTime with Carrie on her lunch break, which was really nice. Just a few minutes before Carrie freed up, I met Nick, who has since been renamed Chaps. He's a really nice guy. One look at him, though, and I knew we wouldn't hike with him for very long. We'll read his register entries, as he'll likely be a good way ahead. Before leaving Antlers, we also met Justin, David, and Sunshine. Sunshine is Justin's dad, going with them as far as Munson. Then Justin and David hike on to Springer, just like us. They are buddies from high school and scouts. All three, Nick, Justin, and David, are right at Haley's age, recent college graduates. Rolling into Cooper Brook then was a lot of fun. It got really social for a bit. Our old crew, Dan, Michaela, and Fernando were all there, and so were these new acquaintances. It was great, and I saw firsthand the phenomenon known as Hiker Midnight for the first time. Even though we were all having a great time, everybody started to head to their tents and hammocks a little before 7. Foot report. No blisters to speak of. An odd thing near my right heel that might be, but is producing zero pain and seems to be already reducing. Early on, though, trench foot was a bit of an issue with all of the moisture. But I started a practice a couple days ago of removing socks and shoes on every stop of any decent length. I found at a couple of those stops, like today when we talked to Carrie, I got to put on dry socks after. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors who help keep Muse's AT podcast on the trail. These are offerings that truly enhanced my thru-hike experience, so I'd really like you to check them out. Please look for and follow the links in the show notes to this episode. Looking forward to that lazy day on the couch, knocking down your Netflix queue and wondering what to wear? Quick answer, wear something else. Summit Ready Apparel is clothing built for those who scramble over jagged rocks, reach the peaks, and actually enjoy getting caught in a torrential downpour. If you're someone who doesn't mind the elements and has the grit to crush the next segment anyway, look no further than Summit Ready to match your restless trail spirit. Check out the catalog at summitreadyapparel.com and get ready for your next adventure. That's summitreadyapparel.com. Looking for your next great trail read? Walk Uphill is a powerful story about leaving the emptiness of modern corporate life behind and finding a completely new beginning on the Appalachian Trail. It's about discovering what life can look like when you embrace freedom, lighten your load, and take it step by relentless step. I actually read this book myself during a couple rest days in Gorham, New Hampshire, right after conquering the brutal terrain of southern Maine. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it from cover to cover in 2 days. The book chronicles the real-life events of the author, Bounce the Hiker, in a twisty, shocking, edge-of-your-seat story that even the most imaginative fiction writer couldn't make up. Just a quick content warning, there is definitely adult material in this book, so I wouldn't recommend buying it for your 10-year-old's birthday. But if you're looking for a gripping, raw trail adventure, I highly recommend Walk Uphill by Bounce the Hiker. You can find it easily on Amazon by searching Walk Uphill Book, or just click the direct link in the show notes of this episode. All right, we've got a couple things we want to tackle in this episode. First, there's a number of things that I want to point up in this entry. The first thing is these Potewajo guys who we met the evening of the 10th and were there when we left Potewajo and were there when we left Potewajo the morning of the 11th. This would be Hayden, Wyatt, and David. it's kind of funny. I mean, they were going northbound. They were not going to be that consequential to this narrative. And this just goes back to what I was saying an episode or two ago about how I really hadn't dialed in yet who I should be mentioning and who I shouldn't be mentioning in my writing, because really there's no reason for them so much. I hope they had a great time. They were totally goofy. They were very young. I remember the one guy, I think it was Wyatt. He had actually gotten sick from exhaustion, and so he trail named himself Sir Yaks-a-Lot or something like that, because it was his first backpacking trip ever, and his two buddies took him through the 100-mile wilderness. One more thing about these guys, because this is something I saw only once or twice my whole through hike, because I think it's pretty well known by now, but may not be known in more of the general public. These guys, when we walked up to Potewajo on the evening of June 10th, two of the guys had their tents set up in the shelter, and the other guy had like a hammock all the way across the shelter. And I don't even know how they weren't tripping over each other. And it didn't make a big difference for Haley and me, because we kind of wanted to be in our tent and hammock that night anyway, right? So it was okay, and it didn't bother even pointing this up or anything. But that's kind of a huge faux pas on the trail, because those shelters are meant to house 6 to 8 people. Some shelters are even bigger. They go up to like 12 or more. But most of them are kind of in the 6 to 8 range. But when you start doing things like setting up your tent and your hammock in there, those 3 guys had the shelter. And had Haley and I wanted a spot in the shelter, we would have had to, tell them to pack up, or we would have been out of luck. One or the other. There would have been some sort of negotiation there that just shouldn't even need to take place. So any of you prospective thru hikers, or even hikers along these trails, section hikers, or even just day hikers, well, I guess a day hiker wouldn't camp anyway, but in any case, keep that in mind. No tents, no hammocks in the shelters. And then Antlers Campsite. Now, one of the things that I don't even mention here at all, it's funny, I was so preoccupied by the cell service, and you can tell that was kind of where my head was at. But the thing that I didn't mention is that Antlers Campsite was absolutely beautiful. Whereas a lot of these places where we would take breaks would be the mountaintops, which were great in their own right, absolutely. But this was a little bit different. It was high up, of course, but I remember a lot of trees and sort of a pine needle strewn floor, and it very flat. It was a beautiful campsite. Of course, we weren't going to camp there that night. We were there at like noon or something like that. But it was a really cool spot in general, even aside for the fact that the cell service really was so good that even that FaceTime call, which I've got to imagine takes a lot more network than a regular phone call, went quite well. And it was funny, I did mention this in the entry, but I'll note it again. We were on the phone with Carrie, and I think Haley had gone off to do a thing for a moment. So it was actually just Carrie and me at the moment when Nick, who would very quickly become Chaps, he came up, introduced himself, or maybe that was right before we got on the phone. I'm not sure, but either way, there was a point in the call where I was like, hey, Carrie, meet my new friend Nick. And they said hi to each other. And then it was leaving Antlers, actually on the, I'll call it a Blue Blaze of the Privy, but in Antlers Campsite, I remember, this Blue Blaze was maybe 50 feet long. That's where we actually ran into Justin, David, and Sunshine. And Justin and David would later become Caveman and Dunk. And my prediction on Chaps was 100% right. He ended up finishing in late October. So he was done by Halloween. So by the end, they're a solid month and a half ahead of me. And I actually don't think that Caveman and Dunk were too far behind him. I think they were somewhere in the middle of like second week of November, that sort of thing. And then there's Cooper Brook that evening. Now, for whatever reason, Potewajo was not the stop for Dan, Michaela, or Fernando. It was just Haley and me with those 3 guys that I was talking about earlier. So Potewajo then was a reunion with Dan, Michaela, and Fernando, but it was also a stop with these 4 guys that we had just met as well. And it was just an awesome dynamic, both the evening of the 11th and the morning of the 12th. I just remember this almost party atmosphere with I suppose it was 9 of us in what was really kind of a bit of a SoBo bubble, at least for that night. And post-trail, I actually keep up with both Chaps and Sunshine. Now, Sunshine we'll talk a bit more about in Munson, because we end up hanging out with him a little bit in Munson. Chaps was there in Munson, but he's kind of passing through pretty quickly. So I'll talk a little bit more about Chaps here. It's kind of fun. I actually got Chaps's number from Fernando, when I visited Fernando in Massachusetts, and Chaps was already significantly ahead of me by then. I want to say 3 to 4 weeks. He had visited Fernando as well. But because I got his number, we would go ahead and text back and forth for the duration of both of our through hikes. And then now a few times after the hike as well, which is how I knew in both cases the finish dates of my friends there. And then this foot report and also the recent wildlife report that you heard me say, that was a kind of a feature of my early writing here that I didn't really carry forward very long. I think you'll hear maybe one more wildlife report and no more foot report. I kind of wish I did do the wildlife report every so often. That might have been good to have carried forward. The feet, there's only one time in the future that the feet become significant anyway, and that just becomes part of the main narrative to begin with. And then for the whole rest of the trail, there's just nothing to report. So it's probably good that I dropped that one. All I would have done was repeatedly said no blisters, which is kind of cool. I think I might have been one of the only ones out there to have no blisters. Maybe I'll start asking that in interviews, whether or not folks got blisters. I don't know, if I think about it. All right, on to a topic that we have teed up for this episode, and that is the topic of food. We talked a little bit last episode about the mechanics of food drop, and of course, we're actually now talking on the day before food drop. As it turns out, all but one of us at Cooper Brook have the same food drop the next day, which is kind of why we all sort of ended up at Cooper Brook. It was a perfect spot to camp the night before to get to that food drop when we needed to get there. So what were Haley and I eating out there? And actually, this is one area where I don't have any notes on this, so I'm going to be doing this from memory, but here goes. One of the things that Haley and I would do, this would be part of the evening routine. I haven't really talked about the evening routine, but then again, it was really just developing in this time, so I don't really know that there was much of a routine to talk about. But the one thing that was quite routine, I said routine way too many times, sorry about that, was that we would get into camp, Haley would kind of go get set up, and I would cook dinner. And then we'd eat dinner together. And that was fun. That was a good thing. This was, of course, when I had my stove, and I was glad I had my stove early on because I really enjoyed that. Just eating, Haley and me, regardless of who else was around, right? And if it was other people around, then that would even be a further communal experience because everybody would kind of do the same thing when they got into camp. They'd eat relatively soon thereafter. So what we're eating on those dinners, one of the things that I distinctly remember is these Knorr sides, Knorr. So a lot of you guys are probably familiar with those. It'd be like a rice-based side dish or like maybe a dried noodle-based side dish, something like that. Something dehydrated that essentially what we're going to do is we're going to boil water and then we're going to pour it into... We've got these, and I didn't mention it in the gear episode, but one of the really cool things that I obtained for Philmont was these fold-up bowls. So these snap fold bowls, that's what they're actually called. They lie flat in your pack, and then you fold them up and snap them together, so then you've got a watertight bowl. One of the things about cooking out there in the woods is that generally you don't want to put food in your pot. You want to just boil water in your pot, and you want to pour that into something else, for the most part. I've heard of people that would make an exception. I actually never did. Then again, I didn't have a pot out there very long. But you want to do that so that you don't have a big messy cleanup on your hands. Everything's pretty simple. So we would pour the boiling water into these bowls where we've already dumped the Knorr side, and then that would substantiate and become our dinner. And some of them worked better than others. Just with the boiling water poured over top of it, stir it a little bit, and it would kind of fluff up and become what you needed it to become. And then to finish off the meal, one of the beautiful things about this snap fold bowl is you just unsnap it and then literally just lick it clean, which might sound a little gross, but it's actually the best leave no trace way to do it because we made zero mess anywhere. And then if there's excess water or whatever, I've got my pack towel. The other time we were cooking was breakfast. We had a bunch of oatmeal out there. We actually got some oatmeal packets from the grocery store in Millinocket. And then actually there were things that I had brought from home too, just random staples that were in the cabinet that I just said, hey, that'll work for the trail. So we actually flew out with some food as well and then supplemented that, as you heard, in Millinocket. So as that pertains to breakfast, we had some sort of bulk oats, and then we had the oatmeal packets as well, and we'd kind of mix those together or do whatever we kind of wanted to do there. One of the things that Haley especially was not very much a fan of, just the plain oats. So I think I mostly ate those, and she maybe ate the packets. Or a lot of times, I think she may have eaten just sort of the meal bars just because she wasn't that into the oatmeal in general. So breakfast was maybe even a little more just me. One thing I discovered in the wilderness after we ran out of fuel, which as I think about it now was on the second half, it wasn't here. We had plenty of fuel to get us to food drop. We probably even had some left over in that canister, and I think I sent that back with our trash during food drop, which in hindsight might have been a little bit of a mistake because we ended up in the wilderness a little longer than we thought we were going to be even at this point, and ended up running out of fuel. But the thing I discovered was that oatmeal just mixed up with a little bit of water and not heated up actually isn't so bad. Especially the packets. They really kind of taste almost exactly the same. Of course, they're not warm, but they taste just pretty much the same. So I would actually end up continuing to do that well after I sent my stove home from the Notch Hostel in New Hampshire. And then the rest of it's really just meal bars. Now, this is where the green belly meals come in. As I had mentioned before, I had kind of become a little bit of a fan of Chris Cage. I'd read his book, How to Hike the Appalachian Trail. I'd started following him on YouTube, and I went ahead and bought some of his bars, and they really are great. I know I ate one going up Katahdin, and then I would eat them every other day, every third day I'd eat one in the 100-mile wilderness. I had gone on to trail with 5 of those, and I kind of lucked out because Haley didn't really like them. So, sorry, Mr. Cage, if you ever hear this, Haley didn't really like them, but I loved them. So there's kind of a good endorsement, but not really right there. So sorry about that. But at home, because I didn't really know I'd like them yet, I went ahead and I got just 5, right? And so maybe I carried 2 in the wilderness, put 2 in the food drop, something like that. But then I would later get more. They actually carry them in the resupply in Munson, so I got a bunch there. And then I ordered 30, got them sent home, and my family would bring them to me on family visits. I know I had also dropped 10 of those in with my shoes when they were sent to my cousin in Pennsylvania. Other than that, it's going to be candy. Candy is actually a big staple of a thru hiker because it's quick energy. And really, when you're thru hiking, you can get away with candy. You're going to burn it off. So a fair amount of candy, Snickers bars especially. I remember reading a study, and actually this came up in the workshop as well, the perfect balance of carbs and sugars and protein. Beyond many of the protein bars out there, a Snickers bar actually has that in the proportion that's needed for strenuous activity. So we took that recommendation, we stocked up on Snickers, and we had some other random stuff. Now, I remember Haley's friend Caroline, she had brought a bunch of just random things because she was cleaning out her dorm room. Haley had graduated, of course, but Caroline's a couple years behind her. Actually, she just graduated this year, so congratulations, Caroline. But she was cleaning out her dorm room that year, and she had kind of these random things. So there were like little crackers and stuff like that too, but then there were these seaweed packets. And these were actually quite good. So it was a seaweed miso soup sort of thing. And so you'd get these little noodle packets, these seaweed packets, and also like a miso packet. You mix all that up, and it was kind of perfect for the backwoods. The only thing that kind of wasn't perfect about it for a hiker, though, is that it was only like 30 calories. So that part of it didn't work out, but I started just mixing that with, a greater quantity of rice or something like that, because we packed dry rice as well. Something I don't think I'd ever do again because that took forever to boil. And so I think I ended up putting the rice either in a trash can or possibly a hiker box. Not quite sure. I had like a pound of rice or something stupid like that. And I only used rice like once or twice. We also had orzo. I'm remembering that now. So we had orzo, and that's what I mainly used with those packets we got from Caroline, because the orzo were like a charm. The rice, again, not so much. I mean, it was really just very hard when I wasn't trying to put the rice in my pot. Very hard to just dump boiling water on rice and get edible rice. So that's what we're eating in the 100. That's what we're eating those early days. I should probably mention that was generally in line with what we learned at the workshop in Millinocket. And the workshop was great for this in that Trash Panda actually grabbed a bunch of food and he segmented out, like, this could be your breakfast, this could be your snack, this could be your lunch, this could be your dinner. And he actually put it on the table that way just to get us starting to think, here's this many calories for breakfast, here's this many calories for snacks, here's this many calories for lunch. But even he said, and I fully agree, you have to do that for your first meal supply. We had to think that way when we were at the grocery store in Millinocket. I don't think I ever went through the grocery store counting calories again because, and this goes back to what I was saying, Trash Panda said, that just becomes second nature. By the time you've climbed Katahdin, you've gone through the wilderness, by the time you even get to Munson, you pretty much know what you need. So it sounds really complicated at first, but then it kind of becomes second nature and you just throw in your pack what you know you're going to eat. And so that pretty much well covers the topic of food, sort of to date at this point. Next episode is our very next interview episode. Very excited to have this next guest. This was a great interview. It's already recorded. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag on who it is, but there is a topic that we're always eventually going to have to address that gets a very light touch in the interview, and that is the topic of drugs on trail. If that's a topic you'd rather skip past, or maybe you're a parent listening in the car with your kids and that's a topic you just wouldn't rather have your kids listen to, in next episode, you're looking at about the 13.5-minute point shortly after the first ad break, and a 15-second skip ahead would get you completely past the topic and you get right back into the interview. For the remainder of this episode, I'm going to go into it a little bit. It's basically the last thing I'm going to say. So if you just wanted to kind of cut it off here, that's perfectly fine. So drugs on trail, the only real prevalent one that we're really talking about here is marijuana. There are other things out there, and I'd hear stories and everything, but you wouldn't really see that or come across it very often, to be perfectly honest. But marijuana is going to be something that's almost a part of the trail culture, to the point where I'd be at a gas station or something like that, just trying to, buy some more smart water or something. And somebody from the town will come up to me and say, "Oh, you're smoking a lot of weed out there, aren't you?" And I wasn't. A lot of people were, though. And honestly, here's the thing. We all got along, right? The trail is a lot about acceptance of really everybody around. I didn't feel judged by people because I didn't do that. I didn't choose to judge people because they did. And I think that mutual acceptance really just made everybody's experience better, and in all kinds of areas, not just when we're talking about smoking pot. But it's there. It's, like I said, it's very prevalent. So that's something that if you're thinking about hiking the Appalachian Trail, just be aware that it's going to be there. If you're somebody who's sensitive to that, just kind of ready yourself for the idea, because it's going to be there. And that's pretty much a wrap for this episode. Get ready for a great interview episode on Friday. Until then, this has been Muse, and you have been listening to Muse's AT Podcast. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.